I can also check if it's recorded.
I think it is.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to crafting your UX design portfolio. We'll get started soon, just waiting for some people to come in. There will be a poll up very soon, so remember to fill that out just so we can get a gauge on and kind of tailor our presentation today. Hi, Vedant.
Oh, Minnesota, BC. That's so cool. Are you guys from Waterloo? Hong Kong?
Hong Kong.
Wow.
We're international, y'all.
California.
Wow, France? Wait, I can't tell if people are like joking or if they're actually from. It's pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna launch the poll. So you guys should see a poll. Do you have a UX design portfolio? And this is just to help us gauge like people's experience so we can curate this presentation for you guys or for y'all. China, oh my God, this is so cool.
Someone said miserable North York. That's where I'm right now.
Calgary, nice.
If you're fairly new, that's totally okay. You're in the right place. We're gonna go through a lot of hopefully very interesting info tonight. Me too.
Same here, Flora.
Do you want to give it like another minute or two?
Yeah, like maybe 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll link you guys the playlist if you want.
Curated by Carol herself.
Let us know if you're planning on hosting an event soon. We'll come join. Okay.
Carol, you're a Spotify influencer.
Fun fact, Vanessa has like how many K listens on one of your albums?
I have this like piano study vibes playlist, and I used the Lo-Fi Girl as the album photo, and for some reason everyone thinks that it's like the legit Lo-Fi like playlist. But yeah.
Okay, I think we can get started in like a minute.
Oh.
Also, update on the poll. So it looks like most people don't have a UX design portfolio yet. So that's great. We're really glad that you're interested in design and that you're here today to learn more about how you can start your portfolio. And hopefully after this presentation, you'll have a good sense of where to start. Okay, we'll get started.
That sounds like a good place to start. So hello everyone, and welcome to Crafting Your UX Design Portfolio. I'm Ashley, and I'm joined here today with Vanessa, Russell, Carol, and Divya.
And yeah, nice to meet you all virtually. If you haven't heard of us yet, now you have. We're UWX. We're a student-run organization at the University of Waterloo, and our goal is really to grow the design community and empower designers to support and inspire each other through community engagements, such as this event. So if you haven't already, you should definitely check out our public Slack channel and follow our socials to keep up with everything that we've been doing for the community and find out ways in which you can contribute back. Cool. So from the poll, it seems like a lot of people are pretty new to design and portfolio building. That's totally fine. This is the place for you, and we're here to help you get started. So what is a UX design portfolio? In essence, it really is just a collection or showcase of your best work and a purveyor of your personal brand. And I put best in brackets just because some people who might not have a lot of experience will just put all of the work that they have on their portfolio, and that's totally fine. But for people who have more experience, you really want to curate your portfolio so that you only show and present your best 3 to 4 pieces. Nowadays, since recruiters will likely find and source candidates either through LinkedIn or through a quick Google search, your UX portfolio is usually going to be the first impression. And so that's why it's really important that you spend a lot of time curating it so that they have a good impression. And also, most of the time, or in most cases, your portfolio matters more and is weighted more than your resume, because that's really where all of your previous work lies and where the recruiter will probably spend most of their time sort of learning more about you. So like every project has requirements, your portfolio is really no exception. So in this case, there should be a couple building blocks that you should reference and you should definitely have in your portfolio. Your name, obviously, your case studies, which is going to be the bulk of it, that documents your previous work, contact information, resume. So if you think of your portfolio as like a product, after the user, which would be the recruiter, finds your resume and views it, and they want to learn more about you, you want to make sure you're filling that gap of where the exit point, where they can contact you, where they can find more about you. So making sure you link your contact information there is really important. Related work. So this could be anything from illustrations and graphic design to motion design to photography. So anything that can really portray your ability to communicate visually a message to the audience. And last but not least, your brand. So yeah, this is something that I think comes with more experience as you design, and it's really okay if you don't know what your brand is or what your style is right now. But it's also pretty important that you show your brand throughout your resume and your portfolio to make your profile stand out. So yeah, if you have all of those things, then you're good to go. Now you might be wondering, where do I begin? What should I prioritize? What does the blueprint really look like? And it usually falls into these 3 main steps. So we'll dive right into the first one, which is your case study. So yeah, case studies make up about like 90% of your portfolio, and it's probably the most important part of your portfolio if you want to build your UX design portfolio. So that's why it's super important that you start off by spending a lot of time drafting up the content, making sure the flow of your case study makes sense, and that there's enough visuals to really guide the content of your case study. And this is also why it's really important to document any of your design work that you do. It should be noted that like these case studies don't have to come from co-op experiences or professional work experience. It can be a side project, a hackathon project, or really anything that you create or build that where you can show that you've leveraged the design process. After you've worked on your case studies, now it's time to sort of really focus on the layout and the user experience of your website. Because like I said before, your portfolio really is a product in itself. So in this example, this beautiful portfolio, you can see that all the important building blocks are really there and visible and accessible on the screen. And they're laid out in a way in which each of it has its own space, and it's not really fighting for, none of the parts are fighting for the user's attention. So it has a really good flow. And then after you have those two parts down, then you can focus on your brand. I know this is like probably like the most fun part of portfolio building. And so I see a lot of people like starting off with like all these really cool graphics and illustrations and brand ideas, and that's really great. But you really want to focus on your case study and your experience before you get to this last step. That being said, like I said before, branding is still like a really important part as a designer, because this is where you can stand out from the other designers and really make your portfolio your own. So here you can see 4 different portfolios, very different brand, very different style. So yeah, this is where I guess you can have fun with it. So as someone who's reviewed many portfolios and talked to a lot of people who want to get into design, one of the most common, probably one of the most common questions that I get is, do I need to code my website or my portfolio? And the simple answer is no. If you don't have a technical background or a lot of time to learn a programming framework or language, that's totally okay. You have a lot of other options and routes that you can take. And I've just listed a few of the common ones on the screen. So here you can see that they're kind of bucketed into 3 main groups. The first one is content management systems. So these include Notion, Medium, and Behance, where you can kind of just copy and paste your content, insert your visual assets, and then you're pretty much good to go. Then you have your editors, which give you a bit more freedom with the layout and the look of your portfolio, but it's still a lot less tedious and time consuming than coding it yourself. And then last but not least, you can DIY it. Obviously, you can make it from scratch, and that does take a lot more time, but it also is beneficial in that it shows recruiters and the team that you can collaborate well with engineering teams, since you have that understanding of how things work and how things are built. So yeah, now that you're presented with all these choices, you might be wondering, which one should I go with? What's the best choice? And it really depends on your situation and what you want to optimize in your portfolio. So let's say you have a lot of time and you really want to learn something new, and you really want this thing to be super customizable. Then I recommend you to try out DIYing it. I also listed Webflow as an option. So Webflow is a software that's kind of an in-between, where you do need a little bit of CSS and HTML background to get started, but it's still a lot less time consuming than coding your website from scratch. Maybe you don't have a lot of time, and this is probably the case for a lot of people, especially as I know Waterloo Works is kind of happening and closing soon. In this case, your best bet is probably to go with a content management system or an editor. What you really want to prioritize in your portfolio isn't so as to how advanced it looks or how cool it looks, but really the content and your case studies. And so it's best to go with these choices where you can get your content up than to DIY it yourself. And another pretty common case is, we're all students, and maybe we're on a budget and we don't want to spend money on a subscription or a paid plan. And so maybe the editors wouldn't be a good choice in this ballpark. But you still can use those content management systems. You can still DIY it, and yeah, and you won't have to pay a penny.
Cool. So now that we know how to get started with our portfolios, I'll go through some of the best practices when it comes to crafting your design portfolio. So these are some of the main best practices that you should consider when you're starting out with your portfolio. And these are kind of the points that we've noticed from seeing a lot of portfolios and from our own experience. So the first one being emphasize quality over quantity. So it's better to dive deep in few projects than to go shallow in a lot of projects. And as Carol mentioned, typically portfolios would have 3 to 5 case studies, and even like 5 is a little bit on the high end. So yeah, you definitely want to be putting your best foot forward and be intentional with what content you're putting on your portfolio. The second best practice is to showcase your design process. So you definitely want to show that you can frame a problem and explore different design solutions within your design process. So it's not always about creating the prettiest wireframes or designs out there. It's also very important to show your process and be intentional and show your iterations throughout your design process. And finally, make sure to kind of inject your personality and tell a story. So this can be either as easy as picking your favorite color and using that throughout your portfolio and throughout your resume. Just really make it your own and know that it kind of represents your brand. So yeah, use your portfolio as your playground and your sandbox and just have fun with it. Yeah, so this is kind of the structure of a case study that typically most designers would follow. This is not by all means like a definitive structure that you have to follow. It's kind of just a guideline to help you start out with building your case studies. So first you'll start out with an overview of your project. So you can talk about your specific role. And maybe if you had teammates, definitely outline their names and their specific role as well in the project. And you can also talk about the timeline of the project. So if you did a hackathon project, maybe specify that you did this project in 2 days versus a 4-month internship. That's a very big difference, and you definitely want to highlight that. After the overview, you want to kind of introduce the problem and what you're trying to solve with your design. So typically you can do this through a problem statement. So having an easy one-liner that just says how might we solve this specific problem. And you definitely want to frame the problem in a way so that users who may not know a lot about the project or the problem space that you're talking about, that really helps them kind of understand and frame the project. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so after your intro, you want to go into your methods. So if you did, for example, user research or user analysis, definitely highlight that. If you did research and found some really interesting insights, it's definitely a good way to introduce the users and give an overview of who they are. And that can be done through personas or user journey mapping and a bunch of other methods. And yeah, after that, go into your designs themselves. Talk about your wireframes and show your design, your designs and your design options too. So it's always good to show different iterations of your design and show your progress throughout the design process. Next slide. Yeah, and then after that, you want to give a nice conclusion. So show your final result. That can be either like a prototype that you can click through. I know there's a lot of ways to embed prototypes in your website or your portfolio. So you can do that, or you can just show your high fidelity mockups. That's also a good way to show your final design. And yeah, at the end, always reflect on the project. So talk about the outcomes and lessons that you learned while doing this project. So a good question to ask yourself is, what would I change given more time? Or if I were to do this project again, what would I do differently? So yeah, those are all good, important questions to ask yourself. And yeah, so this is kind of just an example of a case study and the structure that that you should kind of follow. I feel like this case study exemplifies and really shows the structure that I was talking about earlier. So this is a case study done by Kang Lee. And yeah, you'll notice that there's little navigation on the left-hand side. You don't always need a navigation, but I think it's really good that it outlines the different sections of the case study. So he kind of starts out with an introduction, talks about his teammates, the timeline of the project, and then he goes into some user research, so some personas and some user journey maps. Yeah, and then after that, he goes into some wireframes and the designs themselves, and then talks about different iterations that he took, and then the final prototype, as well as some reflections at the end. Yeah, and so these are some do's and don'ts for when it comes to building out your case studies. Definitely you want to introduce your role and your team. As I mentioned before, it's always important to give credit where credit is due. You definitely don't want to end up in the situation where you put something on your website that wasn't necessarily yours, and then an interviewer or recruiter is asking about that. You can show other people's work on your portfolio, like maybe just one image, but definitely mention that it was not yours if it relates to what you're trying to show in your designs. But yeah, always be it's always important to be intentional with what work you're putting out there and who did that work. And yeah, another do is to include design options. So this is important, especially when you're going through your design process, to show how you landed on your final design. So let's say your first design, there's some pros and cons, and the cons outweigh the pros, so you iterated again and then did something else with the design, and then that's how you kind of landed on your final design. And that process and that iteration is really important to show in your case study. Another one is to use visuals to complement your story. So you always want to be showing or telling a story while you're doing your case study. So talk about your inspirations and talk about what prompted you to design this specific project. And then as you go along your story and your design process, use the visuals to complement that instead of the other way around. And yeah, finally, just use high resolution images. So the last thing you want is for someone to not be able to see your amazing designs. So definitely try to either export them as vectors or export them in the highest resolution possible. And yeah, here are some don'ts. So this is an example of the worst portfolio ever, and this is not anyone's portfolio. This is just something that a designer made for as a joke. But definitely don't use generic photos or anything unflattering, like this stock photo of a road that says "design is a journey." Like, the reader of your portfolio wants to see your work and not a generic stock photo. So first impressions matter. So you definitely have to put your best foot forward on your landing page or on your main page of your portfolio. Another don't is don't share NDA work. So NDA is non-disclosure agreement. So if you work for a company and you signed an agreement to not show a specific product or design, there are ways around that to show or talk about the work you did at that company, but definitely be mindful of what you're putting on your portfolio out there in the public, because you don't want your company to message you a month after your internship saying, take this project down, it's you broke your NDA. So be mindful of that. And yeah, finally, don't put content just to fill up space. That's probably the worst thing you can do, is just use words or stock images like this one to just fill up space that you want to have on your portfolio. So be mindful of what you're putting on your portfolio, and if you don't have anything to put in a specific space, just leave it and move on, because you don't want to have stuff that you don't mean to put on your portfolio. And yeah, so we'll kind of just go through a example of a good portfolio, and this is one that I really like because it kind of exemplifies everything that a good portfolio should have. So this is a portfolio by a designer, and her name's Cheryl, and she does a good job of, capturing your initial attention with this, hello interaction or little graphic. It definitely looks very simple and, it's not too cluttered. So that's definitely, it's easy on the eyes. And yeah, so after you kind of introduce yourself and say hello, you can go into your specific projects. So I think she has probably like 4 projects, and yeah, the thumbnails for the or 3 projects. The thumbnails are very clear, and you can easily tell what the project is. So for example, this first one is a human-centered design project, and it's a task management app concept. So there's not like paragraphs explaining about what the project is. It's just a simple one-liner saying what it is. And yeah, if you click on the case study, I won't go into too much detail, but it's outlined in a way that follows a really good case study structure. So there's that initial thumbnail again at the top. And yeah, she talks about her role, the timeline and the team that she was on, the challenge and the solution, and gives a little preview of the solution just to kind of grab that attention of the reader. So these are the final designs that she landed on, and then she'll go into her process. So she goes into some user research, and then talks about some concept mapping. So that's kind of like the user analysis and the product analysis. And then into ideation, where she talks about her sketches and her wireframing, and then at the end goes into her final design and her final prototype. So yeah, this is a good kind of structure of a case study that I think is very easy to follow and easy to read. So yeah, if you can go back. So yeah, that's example. And we actually found this portfolio on Cofolios, which is like a portfolio resource bank, which Ashley will talk about later. But yeah.
So we thought we would also talk about resume building as well, because that's a gateway for a recruiter to see your portfolio. If they don't like your resume, then they won't want to take a look at your portfolio. Next. So what's in a design resume? To start, it should look different than other tech resumes. Here's an example of the difference between a design resume and a tech resume. Even without looking at the experiences, you can tell which one was done by a designer, the one on the right, by the way the page is organized compared to the one on the left, which is a software engineer's resume. Unlike other tech resumes, for a designer, how your resume appears is a lot more important compared to a PM's or a software engineer's. Next, please. So you might be wondering why. Well, for a product designer, your resume isn't just about discussing your experiences. It should also showcase your visual design skills and brand. Some common questions you should be asking are, is it easy to read? Is the content grouped together appropriately? Did you include your most important work? Is it clean, and is it visually appealing? So some best practices to keep in mind when you're designing your resume is to design it like how you design an interface. Know your user and know what your company that you're applying for is looking for. For example, if the job description says a specific prototyping tool that you know how to use, then make sure to include that in your list of tools and skills. If it also mentions an emphasis on user testing, then also list that within your tools and skills or your experiences. Another best practice is to have a consistent branding with your portfolio and resume. That just makes you more memorable as a candidate. And then finally, to prioritize information. This could be said with like pretty much all resumes, but make sure to give the most detail on the work you feel is your best and most impactful, and your hierarchy should be from top to bottom. So make sure your experiences is first, and then things like extracurriculars or awards or side projects should be below that. So some do's to keep in mind when you're designing a resume is to make sure you show your name, your portfolio link, and your contact info at the top. I think it's usually fine just to have your portfolio link and your email. You don't necessarily need to include your phone number or your LinkedIn because that can add some visual clutter. Also, make sure to keep it one page and include plenty of white space. This will also help it look clean and easy to read. And then finally, again, align your brand. Here's an example of a resume that does those tips. So Jeremy here has his branding on his portfolio, translate his resume with how he titles his name, and he uses the same font throughout. You can see that he pays careful attention to the white space used, and the contact information is on the top so that your recruiter can go to their portfolio straight away. Some other do's is to make sure to describe your impact, and that can be described with metrics, perhaps the platforms you designed for, and any links if your designs were released or in production. And so on the example on the right, you can see that the resume includes, or the experiences include what kind of platforms it designed for, as well as who the product was seen by. And then another do is to highlight your industry experience before anything else. So some don'ts. Some of these are pretty common for all resumes, but some of them are kind of specific for design ones. Obviously, avoid spelling and grammar mistakes. Misalignments with text is one that I think is a little bit more particular with design resumes. As for the image you see on the right, you can see that the bullet points don't necessarily align with the headers, and everything is sort of cluttered together without spacing. So you want to keep in mind for that when you're designing your own resume. Also, don't make the text too small. Design resumes tend to have smaller text than other tech resumes, but I think keeping it at 10-point body and 7-point minimum for things like locations or dates should be fine. And then also, don't make your experiences seem repetitive. You might follow the design process for each and every internship you have or project you have, but try and outline something distinct that you did within your experiences that you didn't do in the last one. For example, you can place a more emphasis on user testing or user shadowing if you did that. Maybe you focused a lot more on visual design and branding and making a design system, and highlight that in your experiences so that your recruiter is not reading the same thing over and over again.
Great. Okay. So now that you've gone through all of these best practices, for example, and you've made your portfolio, one of the quickest and most efficient ways to actually level up your portfolio or your resume is to leverage feedback. So I'll just be going over some quick tips as to how to optimize that feedback to really level up your portfolio or resume. Okay, so it kind of boils down, just from my personal experience, to what you're doing before your feedback and what you're doing after your feedback. So first and foremost, you want to make sure you're establishing context and expectations with whoever is evaluating your work. So what I mean by this is that, for example, if you're messaging a Slack channel or someone's office hours or whatever resource you have to get feedback, you want to make sure you set the scene as to where you are in your work and what you're looking for in terms of feedback. Just to kind of illustrate why this is important is that I've definitely done this myself, is that when you generally ask, can I get feedback on my portfolio from a wide variety of people, you're gonna get a lot of different pieces of advice, whether that's visual hierarchy, whether that's the actual content of your case studies, your design process, et cetera, et cetera. So when you actually go to trying to improve your portfolio, it's gonna be really hard and a difficult process to actually figure out what you wanna improve on. So instead, what I would recommend people to do, even though there's definitely a place and time for just asking for general advice in case you have no idea where to go next, but something that's usually more productive is that you can ask something like, can I get the feedback on the flow of this specific case study? In this case, you can also get feedback earlier and often. For example, I sent a mentor a case study that was still on paper and wasn't even put on a website. and I was still able to get really valuable advice moving forward. And secondly, after you've, for example, you've asked a lot of people for feedback and you have a lot of good thoughts and opinions, something that I find that's really important to improve your work is to synthesize them. So what I mean by this is that you have to remember that everyone's coming with their own context and backgrounds in design. So not everyone's going to have the exact same opinions. For example, I definitely received contradictory advice on some people saying, definitely show your process is really good, while someone else said that, for example, say you're showing too much process and it's too much to read. There is without a doubt that I can guarantee you that you're going to get some sort of contradictory advice of some form. So what's really important is taking all these really good nuggets of advice and really synthesizing them to make them your own as to what works for you and what will actually make your portfolio your own.
So here are some resources that you can use to help you in your design portfolio design journey. Especially if you're a beginner in design, looking at other people's portfolios can be super helpful. And while you shouldn't copy other people, I think looking through a lot of portfolios can really inspire you to create your own brand and also in structuring your case studies. So best folios and co-folios are two really great resources to help with that. And if you want more design resources to help you out, you can check out our design resource library. We have resources for a lot of different design topics. And once you finish your portfolio and you want some advice on it, you can also sign up for our office hours if you don't really have anyone else to reach out to. And you can get one-on-one feedback from a more experienced designer just to see someone else's feedback in case you think you're missing something or you just want a little bit of advice. And finally, if you're really a beginner in design and you don't really have any projects to make a case study with, you can check out our design-a-thon that's coming up soon and hopefully be able to create a case study out of that. Are there any questions? I'm not sure if there's a way to duplicate the design resource library, but you can definitely bookmark the page if you just wanted to save it. Yeah. I can answer the next one. So PDF portfolios, I think it's really good to prepare something like a PDF case study, I guess, when you're interviewing. But I would probably not advise to have that as like your main portfolio, just because, like I said, most recruiters nowadays are finding candidates through LinkedIn and through like a Google search. And so if they can't find you digitally online, then then you won't be seen and then you won't get the opportunity. So like having a website or a Notion page or a Medium blog, just something on the web is super, super important. If you want to link to maybe a PDF portfolio that goes more in depth of your project, or if you want to have something on hand for when you're interviewing, that's totally that's a good way to go about it. But I would go against just having like purely a PDF portfolio, not having anything online.
Well, I can answer the question, what is the design? So we are currently putting together design for March. Is it 13th to 14th?
March 13th to 14th. Mark your calendar.
Yeah. So a design-a-thon is essentially like hackathon for design. So I find a lot of hackathons very code heavy, and a lot of the time design doesn't have too much of a say, and hackathons are super beneficial for, creating your first case studies. My first couple of case studies were from hackathons. So this design-a-thon is going to be super interesting because it'll be just, you guys like designers who are starting out, you want to create your first case study, or maybe you're very experienced and you want to keep developing your skills. We'll have lots of workshops from some really interesting people, and we have some sponsors coming up in the pipeline, which keep an eye out for. But yeah, mark your calendars, mid-March.
Yeah. one of our goals this term was really to have more engagements where people can gain real life experience designing and hands-on experience. So if you don't, like Ashley mentioned, and like Vanessa mentioned, if you don't have any projects, this is like a really great chance for you to come out and work on something and hopefully have something on your portfolio by the end of the weekend. Apps will be out soon. But until then, you can actually fill out our interest form so that you're subscribed to our email list so that you can be the first to hear about all the news and updates on it. I'll send a link in the chat.
And another question is, should you include your grades on your resume? And if so, what format should it be in? You do not need to include your grades on your resume. I believe most recruiters don't really care about your grades, but if your grades are good, then I guess it does not hurt. And for the format, I guess in whatever shows up on your transcript is what you should put on.
Something that I've seen that other people have done that's kind of similar to grades that's a bit more useful than just your actual GPA is listing courses that are actually relevant to design work. For example, if you take in human-centered design courses, that might be useful on your resume because it shows that you've had a formal education in the work that you want to do.
Yes, this designathon is open to students from all over, so definitely get the word out, tell your friends and families, or I guess not, but yeah, it's all virtual, so it'll be all online and you can join in from anywhere across the world.
As to Flora's question,
the actual tile apps will be coming out week of February, the first week of February.
Oh, sorry, I was going to answer about that question about when Waterloo Works asks for a portfolio. Generally, what I've heard that people have done is that because you have to attach an actual document, is that just like any PDF with a link to your portfolio works. So a business card with links to your portfolio, that works great.
We'll also be sending out these slides afterwards, so if you forgot to take notes, I mean, Flora put some of her notes in the chat, but if you want to look at it again and click on some of the links, we'll send this out afterwards.
We're also recording this right now, so I think we'll be putting it up on YouTube soon and share the link on our Slack channels and our socials, so you can always rewatch any parts that you might have missed. But thank you, Flora, for taking the notes and sharing them. Someone said the link to the form doesn't work. Let me try this again. Okay.
I think this link might work.
Okay.
It might take you to the tile website or Notion page.
Yeah, for those now is the name of the designathon, in case you were wondering why we were talking about like tiles, but tiles stand for inspire, learn, and engage. So it's kind of what we're trying to do with the designathon.
Are there any other questions? Guess we'll wait like 30 seconds.
Oh, I can take Sonia's question. If you're coming from a coding background, I think you should still put your developer experience on your resume, but you should definitely include some sort of project or extracurricular that involves design. And in terms of ordering it, that's kind of tricky because obviously your developer experience is your actual work experience. I would say try and see if your developer experience has some components of design in a way, perhaps like you worked with designers, or maybe you focused a lot on the front end. And if you can find like some little things that connect to design, then put that first. If not, then put your design project or whatever you talk about in a case study first in your experiences. No problem. Does dark, light, or light mode matter? It doesn't really matter, but it's cool. And I think if you want to do it, you can.
If you have time.
Yeah, it adds a nice spark, but I don't think it really matters.
For
Any-
what books? Oh,
Yeah, do you guys have any book recommendations? We can all just collaborate on this one.
Design of Everyday Things is a really good one. I would say if you're starting with design, you can look at that.
A lot of designers refer to it as like the Bible of design, so definitely recommend. There's also one called Refactoring Ui. That one's more about like, I guess like user interface principles, but it breaks it down really well, and it adds a lot of like guidelines, I think, to how you would approach visual design work, which I find useful. And then there's one called Solving Product Design Exercises, I think. And it's really good because it goes through like different scenarios and different like examples of whiteboarding exercises that you can practice on your own. This is, I guess, more of like an something that you would use for interview prep. But yeah, it goes through like the different types of exercises or scenarios that an interviewer might give you after you've already created your portfolio. And so that's one that I find pretty useful.
And I guess for people who want to read like general design books, Design for the Real World is probably like one of the best books I ever read, but it's definitely more from like an industrial design standpoint. If you're interested in like design ethics, that's a really good book. Like the author talks about design from every single perspective, like biology, architecture, urban planning, I think. Yeah, it was really good, even though it's pretty dense, so it might take a long time to read through.
Repeat the names of the books for, I think, Carolyn, actually.
Yeah, this one.
Or maybe link them in the chat. I have another one that I'll link as well. It's called Elements of Typographic Style. And I think if you don't really know too much about typography and you want to improve your visual design skills, then typography is a great way to start. And it's cool because it kind of goes over the history of it and how those principles sort of came to be. So would recommend. It's an interesting read, even though it's about text and fonts. Yeah.
There's a question in the Q&A. If you worked on the same project with other designers, how do you write your case study without making it sound the same as theirs?
Good question.
Yeah. I think in my experience, even when I worked with designers on a case study, we always like focused on different things. Like we would take on different parts of like a process and focus more on that, or we would take different, let's say like features of a design, and we would focus a lot on like testing that feature of the design and like making sure that it's really polished. So in my case, it's been nice in that I've been able to write my case studies, focusing on the parts that I kind of spent most of my time on and like polishing up. Yeah, I also would recommend, I also think that just like the tone that people write their case studies is really different from person to person. Like some people write it like very just informational. Some people love the storytelling aspect of it, and they add puns and all this. So definitely write your case study separately, and then like maybe give feedback to each other afterwards, because you'll find that your case studies will actually sound really different, like more different, I think, than you might think. Yeah, hope that answered.
I think it also helps to not read theirs, just so you don't bias yourself.
Yeah. Make it your own. Again. Okay. Cool. Do we have any other questions? All right. I guess we can wrap up. Thank you so much to everyone who came out. I hope you were able to take something away from this, learn something. To those of you who don't have a portfolio, I hope you can start or have an idea of how you want to start your portfolio. Again, if you want some more resources, you can check out our website. You can sign up for office hours to get feedback. Where the community is here to help you. So yeah, don't be stressed or scared. Yeah, you guys got this.
And don't forget to fill out our feedback form at the end, just because we want to hear from you guys and how we can improve for every event that we have. And also we want to hear about what your interests are and what types of events you want to see next.
Thanks for coming.
So
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.